Every choice led to her. I didn't understand those words when my grandmother whispered them before she passed away. At the time, I assumed she was talking about someone I hadn't met yet, someone who would eventually become part of my future. Years later, standing alone in front of a dusty attic mirror, I finally realized she wasn't speaking about destiny in the way I imagined. She was talking about the person I would become after every difficult decision, every moment of courage, and every step toward living honestly. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. I preferred observing instead of speaking, listening instead of arguing, and creating instead of competing. My room was filled with sketchbooks, color palettes, and notebooks full of ideas I never shared with anyone. Whenever friends talked about sports or cars, I found myself fascinated by fabrics, design, and the way clothing could tell a story without a single word. I kept those interests hidden because they never seemed to fit the image everyone expected from me. Years passed, and I convinced myself those dreams belonged to childhood. I chose a practical career, followed a predictable routine, and slowly packed away every notebook that reminded me of the creative person I used to be. Life became comfortable, but something inside me felt strangely unfinished. Every morning looked exactly like the one before it, and every evening ended with the same quiet thought. Is this really all there is? Everything changed when I inherited my grandmother's old house. It wasn't large or expensive, but every room carried memories. While cleaning the attic, I discovered an old cedar chest sealed with a tiny brass lock. Inside were journals, sewing patterns, photographs, and dozens of handwritten letters. On the very first page of the top journal was a sentence that immediately caught my attention. The bravest people are not those who never change. They are the ones who finally allow themselves to grow. I spent hours reading those journals. They weren't simply about making clothes. They were about creativity, confidence, and the courage to express who you are without fear of judgment. My grandmother believed that style wasn't about impressing other people. It was about telling your own story honestly. The next morning, instead of returning to my normal routine, I stayed in the attic with one empty notebook. I began sketching again for the first time in years. The drawings were rough, the proportions imperfect, and my confidence almost non-existent. But something unexpected happened. For the first time in a long while, I completely lost track of time. Days turned into weeks. Every evening after work, I returned to the attic and filled another page. I studied old design books, experimented with colors, and rediscovered the excitement I thought had disappeared forever. It wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming curious again. One afternoon, my friend Emma visited the house. She noticed the notebooks scattered across the table and quietly picked one up. "You made these?" I nodded, slightly embarrassed. "They're only practice." She smiled. "They don't look like practice. They're not good enough." She closed the notebook and looked directly at me. Who decided that? I didn't have an answer. Her questions stayed with me for days. I realized most of my doubts didn't come from experience. They came from assumptions I had accepted, without questioning. A week later, Emma convinced me to attend a local design workshop. I almost canceled 3 different times, convinced everyone there would be more talented than I was. Instead, I found a room filled with beginners, each carrying their own uncertainty. Nobody expected perfection. Everyone simply wanted to learn. The instructor gave us one simple challenge. Create something inspired by a turning point in your life. While everyone else immediately started sketching, I sat quietly remembering my grandmother's words. Every choice led to her. Slowly, I began drawing a series of designs inspired by different crossroads in life. One represented fear, another represented hope, and the final design represented the moment someone chooses authenticity over expectation. As I worked, I realized I wasn't just drawing clothing. I was drawing my own journey. When the workshop ended, the instructor stopped beside my table. "This collection tells a story." I smiled. "I think it does. The best designs always do." For the first time, I didn't feel the need to compare myself with anyone else. My work wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty gave it a kind of strength I had never understood before. That evening, I returned to the attic and opened my grandmother's final journal. Inside, tucked between 2 pages, was another folded note. If you're reading this, you've already made the hardest choice. You chose to begin. I quietly smiled. She had been right all along. Every decision I almost avoided, every opportunity one nearly rejected, every moment I chose curiosity instead of fear, every small act of courage, every mistake that taught me something new, every single choice had brought me to this moment, not to become someone completely different, but to rediscover the creative, hopeful person who had been waiting patiently inside me all along. I looked around the attic one last time before closing the notebook. The room hadn't changed. The old furniture was still there. The dusty windows still let the evening sunlight spill across the wooden floor. The difference was me. For years, I believed the future would arrive one day and magically tell me who I was meant to become. Now I understood the truth. The future is built quietly, one decision at a time. And every meaningful choice we make doesn't lead us away from ourselves. It leads us home. The morning after I finished reading my grandmother's journal, I carried it downstairs and placed it beside my newest sketchbook. Looking at them together felt symbolic. One represented a lifetime of wisdom. The other represented a journey that had only just begun. Instead of asking myself what I wanted to become, I started asking a different question. What can I create today that I couldn't create yesterday? The answer didn't have to be extraordinary. Sometimes it was learning a new technique. Sometimes it was improving a design that had frustrated me for days. Sometimes it was simply having the patience to keep working instead of giving up. Those small victories slowly changed the way I thought about success. A month later, Emma surprised me with another invitation. A regional design showcase is accepting new creators. I looked at the application. I'm not ready. She smiled. You've said that before. And I was right. Were you? I laughed quietly.
No.
She folded the application and placed it back into my hands. You don't need certainty. You only need enough courage to take the next step. That evening, I filled out the form. The moment I clicked submit, I felt the familiar mix of excitement and fear. There was nothing else I could do except continue improving. Over the following weeks, I refined every detail of my collection. I removed ideas that didn't belong. I simplified complicated designs. I learned that creating something meaningful often required letting go of unnecessary things instead of adding more. One afternoon, while organizing my grandmother's workshop, I discovered a small wooden frame hidden behind several boxes. Inside was an old photograph of her standing beside a display of her own work. Written on the back were a few simple words. Your greatest competition is the person you were yesterday. I placed the photograph on my desk where I could see it every day. Whenever I became discouraged, I looked at that picture instead of comparing myself with others. Eventually, the acceptance email arrived. My collection had been selected. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. I expected excitement. Instead, I felt responsibility. This wasn't about proving I was talented. It was about honoring everything that had helped me reach this point. The showcase opened on a bright autumn morning. Creators from many different backgrounds displayed their work throughout the hall. Some specialized in modern concepts. Others celebrated traditional craftsmanship. Every display reflected a different perspective. Walking through the exhibition reminded me that creativity isn't about everyone thinking the same way. Its strength comes from different voices working side by side. When visitors reached my collection, they didn't immediately discuss technique. Instead, they asked about the story. What inspired these pieces? Why do they feel connected? I smiled. They represent different choices. What kind of choices? The kind that slowly change who we become. Several visitors nodded. One elderly woman remained in front of the final design for a long time. Before leaving, she quietly said, "This reminds me that it's never too late to begin again." Those words meant more than she probably realized, because that had become the heart of my own journey. Later that evening, after the showcase closed, I returned to my grandmother's house. The workshop was exactly as I had left it. The journals, the sketches, the afternoon light falling across the old wooden table. I opened my notebook and wrote one final sentence beneath the day's date. Every choice led me here, but none of them were made all at once. They were made one ordinary day after another. I closed the notebook and smiled. The future no longer felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. It felt like an unwritten story waiting for tomorrow's first page. Winter arrived quietly, bringing with it shorter days and longer evenings. The old house became even more peaceful, and the workshop slowly turned into the place where I spent most of my free time. Every shelf held another lesson, every notebook another reminder that meaningful work is built through patience rather than speed. One snowy afternoon, I received an unexpected letter. It wasn't from a company or an event organizer. It was from a small community arts center. Someone who had visited the showcase had recommended my work and suggested that I speak to a group of young creators who were just beginning their own journeys. I read the invitation twice. The idea of teaching still felt strange. I remembered being the person who sat quietly in the back of the room, convinced everyone else was more talented. Now someone believed I had something worth sharing. Emma smiled when I showed her the letter. You should do it. What if I don't know what to say? You don't have to know everything. What if they ask questions I can't answer? She laughed. Then answer honestly. Her confidence in me became the final push I needed. The following Saturday, I walked into the community center carrying nothing except my sketchbook. The room wasn't filled with professionals. It was filled with beginners. Some looked excited. Others looked nervous. A few avoided eye contact completely. I recognized every expression because I had once worn them myself. Instead of beginning with a lecture, I placed my oldest sketchbook on one table and my newest one beside it. I opened the first page. The room became quiet. The drawings were awkward. The proportions were uneven. Some pages contained more erased lines than finished ones. I smiled. This was my beginning. Several people looked surprised. You made mistakes too? I laughed. Every single day. Then I opened the newest sketchbook. The improvement was obvious. Not because I had suddenly become gifted, because I had refused to stop practicing. One young student raised a hand. When did you stop being afraid? I paused before answering. I didn't. The room became silent. The fear never completely disappeared. So, how did you continue? I stopped waiting for fear to disappear before taking action. Those words changed the atmosphere immediately. People relaxed. They stopped worrying about being perfect. Instead, they became curious. During the workshop, everyone created something completely different. Some designed landscapes. Others focused on objects or memories. One participant drew an old family photograph that meant everything to them. Every project reflected a different story. By the end of the afternoon, I realized something. Helping someone believe in themselves felt just as rewarding as finishing my own work. As everyone packed up, one teenager quietly approached me. I almost stayed home today.
Why?
I thought I wasn't creative enough. I smiled. Do you still believe that? They looked down at the drawing in their hands.
No.
Those 2 letters carried more meaning than any applause I had ever received. Driving home that evening, I thought about my grandmother. Perhaps this was what she had always hoped for. Not that I would become successful, but that I would keep learning and encourage others to do the same. When I returned to the workshop, I noticed the first notebook still lying open beside the newest one. Months earlier, I only saw the mistakes inside those early pages. Now I saw courage, because every imperfect drawing represented a day when I chose to continue instead of quit. I carefully closed both notebooks and placed them side by side on the shelf. The journey was far from over. There would be new projects, new challenges, new lessons. But I finally understood something my grandmother had known all along. Every meaningful choice shapes the next one. Every small step creates another opportunity. And every ordinary day carries the possibility of becoming the moment that changes everything.